Well, I never knew, Mr. Zapruder, that as any reporter and all reporters would do, everybody was scrambling for witnesses, evidence, angles to the story. And very quickly, we, and I mean all of us at CBS, and for that matter at KRLD, said, we have to find pictures. We're televisionists. People had cameras in the crowd. Home movie cameras were not all that prevalent in 1963. Now everybody has one. Everybody has a digital camera. But those days, people had them, but not many people had them. And so we, while doing everything else, were making our calls and trying to see if we could find somebody who had still photographs, just, Kodak camera. And wouldn't it be terrific if somebody, and we said to ourselves, somebody had to be there with home movie cameras, probably several somebodies. And we looked at pictures of the crowd trying to point out people. But, eventually somebody said to us that somebody had mentioned somebody had it. And we got to Mr. Zapruder, who very calmly said, did you have pictures? He said, yes. Your heart begins to jump. This guy's got pictures. Are they pictures that wiggle? Yes, I have. This is a home movie camera. Home movie camera. Tell me again where you live. And, do you remember getting much? He said, I've got the whole thing. Said, what do you mean you got the whole thing? He said, I was rolling the whole time. Well, where were you? And he described where he was, which was a very good position. Well, are you sure? Yes, we had that discussion. And at any rate, his film had not been processed. And getting home movie film processed at that time was no easy thing. Well, a number of things happened, and we helped arrange for him to have that film processed on a speeded up basis. And indeed it was. The Kodak people and the local Kodak guy, I think it was Kodak, but anyway, it got processed. And after it was processed, we kept calling him, and he, rightly so, got himself a lawyer. And he said, look, it was going to be, if you'll meet me at the attorney's office, my recollection is even the attorney might have called. So anyway, arrangements were made after the film was processed that we would have an opportunity to view it in the attorney's office. And because we've been at least mildly helpful, I think more than that, but it was, you'll get the first look at it. What they meant was you get the first television look at it. We got to the attorney's office, which I don't remember what his name was. It wasn't far from the KRLD studios. I went over there from the KRLD studios. I went there. The attorney was very nice. And I caught, seated in a chair in the outer office, was a guy named Dick Stolley. Dick Stolley was a Time magazine correspondent and a good one. He later invented People magazine, made himself in Time a fortune, but that's another story for another day. I knew Stolley because he had covered the civil rights movement. I had crossed paths with him before. We didn't know each other well. But by this time, Stolley was working for Life magazine. So when I come in the door, Stolley is there saying, well, we're not going to be the only ones to see this film. And Life magazine, at that time, it's now out of business, I think. Deep Pockets, Loose and Company. But very quickly, they said, here's the arrangement. We're going to show you this film once and only once. We have a projector set up in the attorney's office and dark office. You're going to see the film and see it once. And then after you've seen it, we'll talk about possible arrangements. And we went in, they turned the projector on, and there it was, the whole assassination, frame by frame by frame. It all went by fairly quickly, but it was all there. And I remember I almost levitated out of my seat. Never seen anything like it in my life before or since. The whole thing, I didn't expect him to have every moment of it. And neither did Stolley, for that matter, either. He may say differently now, but he was not sweet daddy cool in that room. Neither was I. And as soon as the film ended, I leaped out of my chair and practically took the door off the hinges to get back to KRLD to describe what I had seen. The best story in the world is not worth a damn unless you can get it out. And sure, mighta, coulda, shoulda, but I've never even thought about it. I just practiced it off the hinges. I believe that this was it was within 24 to 36 hours. Well, no, I just went back to KRLD.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I may have set a new world's record for a 115, 20-yard dash, whatever it was probably further than that. But KRLD was not far away. But as I left, I said, I'll be back and we'll talk. And I went to KRLD, where the CBS coverage was emanating from. I told New York that I'd seen this film and told them what I'd seen, even before I got through it. They said, and again, I think it was Lazar, who said, just hold it, we're coming to you right away. And I sat down and from memory described what I'd seen. Didn't have a note, hadn't taken any notes, wasn't any notes to be taken, and described what I had seen. And when I did that once, then they took it back in New York. The coverage was live all straight through, describing what I'd seen. That Ernest Leiser, who had hired me and was a mentor of mine, said, we're going to come back to you to do it again. So, mind you, go from memory what I've seen. He said, leave out the part about Mrs. Kennedy. And I said, well, what do you mean? Because get the situation here. And he said, well, you described Mrs. Kennedy as getting out of the car over the trunk. And I said, yes, that's what it showed. He said, leave that out. And I said, he said, don't argue, just leave that part out. Do the whole thing again. But it had played before, it was on the air before, but come back because other people come to the set. We didn't have as much videotape, even in New York at that time. Anyway, he wanted me to do it again. And so I did it again, and the second time I did not describe Mrs. Kennedy. He told me later that he thought that an inference could be drawn that Mrs. Kennedy might be trying to get out of the car. We did not have this conversation on air. And I said, well, Ernie, who could have blamed her? She's got her husband's brains on her dress. I mean, who could blame her? He said, well, but the country may not be ready for that, and we don't know that. And somebody had said, well, maybe she's trying to help a Secret Service man get in the car, in which indeed she might have been. But anyway, the second time around, I didn't describe that. So after the second time, Ernie said, well, stay there. And I said, look, I think I need to get back to the attorney's office because Stolly is there. And he said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, we got to bid on it because Stolly is there. I had hoped we wouldn't have to bid on it, but the reality was I knew Stolly. Life, time, loose publications. This is not going to be easy. And so he said, well, wait a minute, let me check up front. And I said, well, I don't have time to check up front. And he said, well, wait a minute. And he talked to somebody, came back and said, look, he said, don't start at this, but we'll give you a $10,000 top. And if it's going to go above that, then you need to be back in touch. And I didn't groan. I just sort of said, well, you remember Life magazine's in this. And they said, well, $10,000 was a lot of money at the time. Anyway, I got back to the attorney's office, and the attorney said, well, we've sold the film. And I said, well, what do you mean you've sold the film? You can't sell the film. We said, I told you I'd be back. And he said, well, Life magazine made a preemptive bid. And he wouldn't tell me what it was. Fairly quickly afterward, the word was that they gave $50,000 for it. I thought then and think now that they gave more for it at that time than they said they gave for it. But at any rate, the attorney had reached an agreement with Life. I think, I can't be sure of this, I think he also liked the idea that Life wouldn't be showing the film right away. That their intention was to use stills from the frames of the film. But I don't remember his saying that. Basically what he told me is, it's over. I've struck a deal. And I remember calling New York and saying, look, Life's bought it. And they said, well, go to $12,000. I said, let me tell you guys, we're not on the same planet, and besides that, it's sold.
There's a story that Don Hewitt said you ought to just go in there and grab it and run off with it. You've heard that story, I'm sure.
I've heard that story, and I don't want to get into any arguments with Don.
Okay.
Everybody has selective memory. But let me just say that the story that Don told about that makes a nice story, but it's not true.
Fair enough.
And I say that with great respect, but it just is not true. You know, it just isn't. It just didn't happen that way. It does make a good story, though.